On the Africa room, no seed biting, never bites. Fast water dribbling in the girls down with the guys. Final seat blank, you right, red fine. Owen G, Max Ford, Robert C, Gallon Neck Night. Hot stove talk, Robert C, bringing the hype. EC's alive, plus trust under those in my city life. White. Queens got the dreams united. On the rag, trump out, bring me stack. Night and under that chocolate flag. Smack that hole out the park. Fuck a deafening black. Side game time, Robin CP time to ignite. Under NYC skies, we fight the good fight. Remains cheer in the orange, we unite. Match forever. I'm fit to be in sight. Match riding high. Energy like a live wire. Queen City chance. Passion never tires. Grand slam dreams and paces over fast. Holding it steady, cause we know we gonna last. We the kings of the field, time to ignite. Under NYC skies, we fight the good fight. Remain cheer in the orange, we unite. Match forever. I'm fit to be in sight. All hearts ignite like NYC stars. Robin CP, guiding even through scars. Queens got the glow, city anthem flows.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets Hot Stove, episode 31 of the Hot Stove. It's getting closer and closer to pitches and catches as we are 2 weeks away from spring training. And thank God, because I am so sick and tired of talking about the roster and the news and who we're getting, who we're not getting, and all that fun stuff. But once we get our special guest on and when he pops up, we'll put him on. And of course, we got to, pepper him with questions and get all that info we can out of him, as he's been putting a ton of articles out over the last 24 hours. And we'll definitely take care of that once he pops on. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. A ton of reports from our special guest is correct. We're going to try to get to the bottom of everything happening in Mets land for you all. Appreciate you all being here in the chat, whether you're on my live stream or whether you're over on Rob's live stream. Please smash those subscribe buttons and thumbs up buttons. We got a lot of great content for you all here tonight, as always. Pitching, bullpen, what's happening at the corners with first base, Pete Alonso, Mountcastle, Torkelson. We're getting into it all, trade outlooks, this, that, and the other. It's going to be a great discussion. I can't wait.
Yeah, it is going to be fun, and it's going to be very interesting what Pat has to say when he jumps on, because, again, he's been rolling out articles like crazy over the last 24 hours. It was dead quiet, after the whole Alonso situation, declining the Mets offer, and he was, on the quote-unquote 10-yard line with the Toronto Blue Jays. Nothing really has, materialized when it comes to the Mets. Over the last, 24 to 48 hours, you started to hear a little bit rumbles about, bullpens, rotation, and all that stuff that, listen, I'm getting excited about, because, we talked about it, Chris, about when the rotation is the big issue. And that's what we're going to, talk about. And I see Pat coming on the stream right now. So I'm just going to roll him up here just now. Give me a second. All right, there we go. How you doing, Pat?
Pretty good, guys. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Good. Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we got Pat here, obviously the expert here and the guy that knows everything that we need to know. That, of course, we don't. We just give our opinions, but we're definitely gonna try to get everything we can out of Pat tonight. We're not going to keep you too long because we know you're a busy guy and got a lot going on this off season. But Pat, thank you so much. Make sure you follow him and Ragazzo Report on X, and you can find all his articles on SI as well, which he's been posting like crazy. All those articles coming out over the last 24 hours, and it's getting Mets excited. Pat, you know how that goes. Right now with Pete Alonso, and that's the first question we have to ask you. When it comes to Pete Alonso, are you confident that he's gone, or do you think that you're hearing things that it's still a possibility that a marriage could happen with the Mets and Pete Alonso?
Well, hearing nothing on that front of them reconciling, it's a separation right now, and it's gotten to be a pretty ugly separation, and time will tell if this is going to turn out to be an ugly divorce. And yeah, I mean, Pete Alonso is going to have to answer to a lot. if he does in fact come back to the Mets. At this point, haven't heard any rumblings of re-engagement since the war of words on Saturday between Steve Cohen addressing the fans at Amazing Day and Scott Boras putting out his rebuttal into the media. So, I mean, Pete's not signed. So either he doesn't have the offers that he's looking for right now, or he's holding out, maybe seeing if there's anything there, if the Mets door can reopen. Because I do believe the Mets door is closed right now, but that doesn't mean that it's locked. The Mets have moved on, and they've shown that through their moves, and they're interested in other players and other options, and they have moves on the table, not just at first base, but in the pitching department as well. And there's multiple ways they can improve this team if Pete doesn't wind up coming back. So the Mets said they needed an answer soon. I feel like this has kind of been prolonged since then because it still hasn't been resolved, and it won't be resolved until Pete winds up signing with another team or coming back from the Mets.
Yeah. What is Pete looking for though? Like, have you found anything or heard anything or with your sources that is he looking for? No deferred money, more opt-outs, more years, more money. What do you think he's looking for exactly?
I think that's the $1 million question. What does he want? The Mets offered him a 3-year deal that would have been close to $75 million with opt-outs. He could come back. If he hits 27 home runs for the Mets in 2025, he's the all-time leader in home runs in the franchise's history. Then he could retest the market, and hey, maybe he could get that long-term deal with the Mets or get that long-term deal elsewhere. He wouldn't be the first to do that. And I even wrote that in a column for Mets on SI on Sunday about, look at what Yoenis Cespedes did. He carried the Mets to the World Series almost single-handedly in 2015 from an offensive standpoint. He wound up taking a 3-year, at the same age as Pete, keep in mind, 30 years old, took a 3-year, $75 million deal, opted out after the first year, having a big year again, and wound up signing a 4-year, $110 million deal to stay with the Mets. So Pete means a lot more to the franchise overall than Cespedes did, but it still could work out in that favor as it did for Cespedes. It didn't work out for the Mets, obviously, signing him to the 4-year, $110 million deal, but Pete would make his money back that he turned down in the extension. They offered him a 7-year, $158 million extension at market value for a first baseman 2 years ago. He said no. He hired Scott Boras after that. He said no to the Mets short-term deal that I believe he's probably not going to top elsewhere and hasn't so far. Otherwise, he probably would have signed with a team. And it's kind of like, what else do the Mets need to do? And you heard it through the voice of Steve Cohen, just the frustrations. And I think Steve Cohen's a little bit tired of hearing from the fans all about Pete Alonso after he got Soto for close to $800 million last month. Like, it's kind of like the spoiled children and the rich parent who's making sure that his kids are raised right. So just telling them, hey, deal with it. Like, we've tried, we're exhausted, and like, this might not happen. So get used to it.
You hit it right on the head right there. And I just wanted to make sure that we were completely clear about that at this point, from what you're hearing, the New York Mets do have the best offer out there for Pete Alonso. That is clear cut as of right now that anybody knows.
As far as I know, and as far as what's been reported, that is the case. I mean, again, I don't know. He's been talking to the Toronto Blue Jays. They seem like the clear-cut favorite as of the end of last week, and now nothing. So I don't know what the Blue Jays offer is that's on the table to him. And if it topped the Mets offer, again, I feel like he would have accepted it by now. That's me speculating. But yeah, it appears that the Mets have given him the highest offer so far.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense too. So I was kind of wondering, in terms of the Pete Alonso discussion before we go into the internal options, is that, I've always been in the camp of, is Pete Alonso fully confident in himself to take that prove-it-year deal without the extra insurance of those opt-outs? Let's say a 1-year deal. That's presumably not going to happen. They're pushing for the 3 years with the opt-out. But have you heard anything as well in terms of just the confidence level of these negotiations and what they're projecting him to just do in 2025? And if he's still pursuing, if the end game, I should say, to frame this in the correct manner, if the end game is still a long-term deal next offseason on an opt-out?
I think that there's probably some hard feelings from Pete's end, I would imagine. He's done a lot for the franchise. I get it. And the Mets have their value with the player. And Pete and his agent Scott Boras see it differently than the Mets. And that's why they're so far apart and haven't been able to agree to anything thus far. So yeah, I do think, again, that Pete should be willing to take the 1 year, should say a short-term deal with an opt-out, and essentially being on a prove-it year in 2025 and re-entering next year to make more money and having that type of Pete Alonso year that we were used to seeing in 2019, 2021, 2022. Like, those were the 3 best years of his career. The last 2 years have been a little bit of a decline. 217 average in 2023. His slugging percentage has gone down each year. He was abysmal with runners in scoring position last year in the regular season. Like, he had a big postseason and he extended their season. He single-handedly saved the Mets season with that home run in Game 3 of the wild card off Devin Williams. Biggest moment of his Mets career, and there's been a lot of them. That was the moment. And honestly, I've said this on other podcasts and to other people that if Pete doesn't hit that home run and the Mets season ends there, nobody's talking about him coming back. Like, the Mets fans were ready to run him out of town with just some of the disappointments that they had in his season last year, at least for the most part, with hitting with runners on base and in scoring position.
There's points when we were doing our streams last year that we were also in that camp too, running him out of town. But at this point, we have to talk about Steve Cohen's comments and what he kind of stated in the latter half of those comments of going with what they have right now and the group of guys that they have right now. And there's a clear need for a corner infielder at that point, whether it's internal or external. I mean, do you have any sort of a sense as to how the Mets would approach third base? Let's say they are open and willing to just move Vientos over in the event that Pete Alonso is not a New York Met and they don't go the trade route for the guys that we'll probably be talking about the next question. This trio of Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, pending the health and the recovery from the knee procedure, and also a guy that I like to lump into that category, even though he doesn't really have any experience there as of yet. Is there any possibility that the Mets could be looking at giving Luis Angel Acuna an opportunity to compete with those two guys for third base?
I think yes, to answer the last part of that question. I think Acuna could handle it. He's a smooth fielder, composed, poised, handled a lot of high leverage situations, and was a big part of helping the Mets make their playoff push and clinching that wild card spot when he filled in for Lindor for those 14 games. So I think it's a possibility. I don't think he's the best fit or even viewed as the best fit at that position because of his build and his body type and his height. I like him better as a second baseman, but they do have Jeff McNeil right now, who's most likely going to be on this roster. I can guarantee you almost that he's going to be on this roster come opening day. Brandon Nimmo's still dealing with plantar fasciitis, and they have to play it safe with him because they don't want to risk worsening it and losing him for a longer period than trying to rush him for opening day. Opening day is special, but it's a very long season. It's a marathon. And McNeil can play left field, as can Starling Marte as long as he's on this roster, and as can Jesse Winker. So and also Tyrone Taylor, can't forget about him. But Jeff McNeil, if he's not playing second base, if he's playing a lot of left field, that opens up a spot for Acuna at second base. If the Mets don't add an external first baseman, then Vientos would be the primary first baseman. Mauricio or Beatty might get a shot at third base. I think that makes the most sense. And if McNeil is playing second and Nimmo is healthy enough and playing left, then it does make sense for Acuna, if Acuna earns it, if he has a big spring training, for him to play third base, because the Mets right now don't have a backup shortstop on the roster either, unless Acuna is on their opening day squad.
Any indications or rumblings of Jose Iglesias? I know a lot of Mets fans are very curious about Jose Iglesias as it pertains to the corners. That could be a little bit of a stopgap option for the Mets. We know OMG. We know everything that Iglesias did for this organization last season. Anything that you've heard on the Jose Iglesias front?
It's hard to say because that's been so quiet. He's going to get a major league deal. Because of his age, he'll probably get a 1-year deal. And I think as long as he's on the table for a 1-year deal, I think the Mets would consider it. Also depending on how things play out with Alonso and in these next couple of weeks. But right now, I haven't heard anything on the Iglesias front other than he obviously has interest in coming back. They probably have some level of interest, at least, into bringing him back. He's a great clubhouse guy, veteran leader, smooth fielder, was very, very good with runners in scoring position last year. They can't expect him to put up the numbers that he had last year, but he would be a nice, solid, glue guy, clubhouse leader, and vibe bringer, of course. And just to run it back with the OMG and Grimace and everything else, like I think that could help the team, you know, from a morale standpoint as well. And yeah, he's a guy who has that positional flexibility and versatility that David Stearns values. So for the right price, I think Iglesias is realistic. I just don't know what he's looking for on the market right now.
Got it.
Yeah, that does make sense. And, you know, if the Mets are confident in their internal options at the corners, but if they get the itch to go outside the organization and trade for a first baseman, and he did do a report on this in regards to Spencer Torkelson and Ryan Mountcastle. What are you hearing on the latest on that? Who are they more interested in, or are they interested on both of them evenly, and they're just trying to find the best deal to get one of those guys wearing the orange and blue?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of tough to say too, as to who they're more interested in, because Mountcastle's kind of more of an established big leaguer. He crushes left-handed pitching. He's a solid above average I would say above average player. His power has gone down. He doesn't get on base that much. He doesn't walk that much. I think that's like he hit 31 home runs in 2021, and his homer total's gone down every year, 22 and 18, 13 last year. Like, yes, Baltimore, at least for right-handed hitters, is not an ideal fit since they changed that wall out there. And if he pulls more at Citi Field, like, the home runs will probably come back. So I think they do like him. He is very good defensively, 2 outs above average last year, 8 defensive runs saved. But Torkelson, on the other hand, when you look at Mountcastle has 2 years of control. He's going to be 28 years old soon. Torkelson's a former number 1 overall pick, 25 years old, similar profile to Brett Beatty, 25 years old, former top prospect, former first-round draft pick, who really, you know, has struggled and lost his job, demoted. But Torkelson at age 24 in 2023 hit 31 homers, 94 RBIs, 759 OPS. So I think the floor might be higher right now, at least from what we've seen from Mountcastle. Like, you can rely on him probably more, and like Torkelson will take more fixing with his approach at the plate. But Torkelson's also very good defensively, and he comes with 4 years of cheap control, and he's a cheaper option than Mountcastle, and probably would take lesser to in asking price to acquire a Torkelson, because he's displaced right now. I'm kind of shocked, honestly, that the GM of Detroit came out and said, "Oh yeah, Colt Keith is our first baseman," after they signed Gleyber Torres, because they kind of plummeted. I don't know if what they meant to do by that, but they plummeted the trade value of Spencer Torkelson, saying that he doesn't have a spot. So yeah, I don't know. I think either option would be intriguing. They would have to do more of a reclamation with Torkelson, but they would have him for longer. He's cheaper. He's a lower risk option, and because they would have to give up less, and he costs less. So I don't think they could go wrong either way. But Mountcastle is the more proven big leaguer, but at the same time, Torkelson at a young age has, you know, put up a pretty big year in 2023, and the Mets could see that again with some minor tweaks.
Yeah. Have you heard like any names bantered about like a package that would go either way to Detroit or Baltimore if it is the case?
Well, I know Detroit's looking for a couple top prospects, probably in the top 15, top 30 range. With Torkelson and the Mets, like, especially if the Mets were to acquire a first baseman, like, that means Vientos is staying at third. That means Beatty should be shipped out and sent I think Beatty and Torkelson both could benefit from a change of scenery, but there would be no spot for Beatty. So I believe that a swap for Beatty and Torkelson makes sense to me. I don't know that that's what they're discussing or that's what's going to come to fruition, and if Detroit would be cool with that, or if the Mets would be cool with that. I know they still do think very highly of Beatty, but that's what makes the most sense to me. But yeah, I do think at least the Tigers are looking for a top prospect or two as well. With Mountcastle, I think the Orioles could use pitching, so that's something there. The Mets are pretty deep in the starting pitching department. They are going to go with a 6-man rotation this year with Kodai Senga now returning. That's really the best way to utilize him in a starting rotation, and especially with Clay Holmes being a reliever the last few years, like he's now becoming a starter. Like, 6-man rotation makes sense. So especially if they lose Alonso, he's attached to a qualifying offer. They get a compensatory draft pick, and Nick Pivetta was a name who they were interested in December, and Pivetta is attached to the qualifying offer as well. So, like, if say Alonso walked, the Mets made a move for a first baseman and Pavetta's still out there and they strike on him, that would make sense because the qualifying offers would kind of cancel out there with the draft picks. Mets would be receiving one, they'd be giving one away. And yeah, I mean, I just wrote about this before we hopped on. Like Jack Flaherty's a fit too if his market continues to stay the way that it is, and if the Mets could have him for 1 to 3 years, that's perfect. Exactly what David Stearns has been doing and wants to do with starting pitchers. And Flaherty, I think if you should shoot high, and Flaherty would be that guy. To add to the top of the rotation. Then it's looking pretty serious with Senga, with Sean Manaea back, Flaherty. David Peterson coming off a really good breakout season. Montas, like that would make the Mets rotation very strong. And Flaherty said it recently on Foul Territory that he now going back to LA probably most likely isn't happening with all the arms they've added in the starting department. And Flaherty wants to go somewhere where he has a chance to beat those guys. And that would be with the Mets, who were 2 wins away from beating the Dodgers and going to the World Series last year. So that would give him the best opportunity in the National League, in my opinion.
You dropped that bombshell article about the starting pitchers because that's what everybody's concern is moving forward for the New York Mets, especially in 2025. Flaherty is undoubtedly the best free agent out there. I want to ask you about any potential trades, for a starting pitcher between the New York Mets and whichever respective team, but I cannot skip over external first base options. We're talking about trades for Mountcastle and Torkelson without bringing up the name that everyone wants to go after if Peter Alonso walks away. And I know you know who I'm about to bring up. So what's the outlook of Vlad Jr., whether it's this offseason via trade or whether it's free agency for the Mets in 2026? What are you hearing?
With Vlad, him being traded doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense. Toronto's baseball leadership group, I've said it a million times, they're on the hot seat, and Shapiro's going into the last year of his deal. Atkins' seat is on fire. Like, whether they extend Vlad by his self-imposed deadline of February 17th when spring training workouts officially begin, like, whether they extend him or not, they're not going to trade him. And Toronto's goal is to get 1 or 2 of Alonso, Scherzer, and Bregman. If they don't wind up getting Alonso, Bregman kind of fits better because then Vladdy doesn't have to play third base. And Vladdy's been training at third base all offseason, whether they were going to get a first baseman or not, because he wants to play the position. But Vladdy could stay at first. They say they bring in Bregman and they bring in Scherzer. Like, they're not, whether Vladdy's extended or not, they're not going to trade him because they're going all in a weak American League where why couldn't they win a wild card spot this year? And that would save everybody's jobs. So they're just not. Why would they get a boatload of prospects for Vladdy when they might be losing their jobs as a result of it? The greater good of the organization, yes, but if you're not there for the long haul, like, why would the people in power making those decisions do that? They just wouldn't. So I don't see Vlad getting traded.
And I will hold myself accountable to this because I've always doubted the, I guess, outlook of a team, whether it was in Queens or Toronto, with both Pete Alonso and Vlad Jr. in the mix. Could you see a possibility where that could happen, maybe in Toronto, if they are serious about extending Vlad and also giving Pete Alonso the best deal that kind of overtakes what the Mets are offering right now?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was going to happen. I really did. And then Saturday happened, and today's Tuesday. It's Tuesday night already, East Coast, and Alonso still hasn't signed with the team. It kind of looks like he's waiting it out to see if the Mets are going to come back to the table and if they can get something done. Like, it seems like he's holding out to go back to the Mets. He's said it all the way that he wants to go back to the Mets. Mets made it clear that they want him back. They value him. So they just don't see eye to eye on the value, between the two sides. So I think Toronto wants that. They want, like, to bring in Pete Alonso and keep Vlad, and that would give them a pretty high chance of making a postseason spot in 2025. So yeah, I think that's definitely a realistic scenario if the breakup and divorce is finalized between the Mets and Alonso.
Got it. Okay, that sounds good. All right. Back to pitching, because you also dropped another article talking about Michael King. I mean, we're talking about articles after articles after articles and how much sense that makes for the New York Mets, who are still after that top line starter. We don't know what the Padres' outlook is at this very moment, given both King and Cease. We've heard some smoke, I guess, surrounding Cease as well. We don't know if it's an and or an or situation with both of those names as it pertains to either of those guys. I guess my question is, and we've seen the Mets, I guess, engage in trade talks, right, with the White Sox for Crochet. They couldn't outmatch the Red Sox package. He went to Boston. We've heard some smoke, I guess, surrounding Luis Castillo, but that's a different situation given the contract length associated with him. We're talking about 2 rentals with Cease and Michael King at their respective values. How interested do you see the New York Mets in pursuing a type of trade with the Padres for either of those names, and who is the better fit at that point?
I think the Mets would love to have Dylan Cease or Michael King in the rotation, or both. Obviously, they're not going to trade for both, but I don't even think it makes sense that they trade for one as a rental. As you said, like the price is astronomically high for Cease right now, and the price is still going to be high for Michael King. And I felt like Michael King is a good fit, and maybe that's the one they should aim for. But again, it's going to cost way too much for 1 year rental. It's just not David Stearns' style. I would be pretty surprised if they traded for one or either of them.
Okay. That puts things into perspective for me as well, because I was kind of curious on what the package would have to look like in terms of, the prospect pool, top 10s, multiple top 10s, etc. So that's a really good indication right there with what David Stearns is actually thinking in terms of trading that capital for a rental. So that's what I got for the starting pitchers. Talk about some relievers, Rob.
Yeah. Well, the reliever market is, it's volatile as it is. A guy can pitch great 1 year and the next year look like, total garbage. But the reliever market right now is obviously wide open. There's so many relievers available. You also talked about Tim Hill in one of your articles. I know Chris doesn't like a soft tosser, which Tim Hill kind of is. He's not a flamethrower by any means, but he pitched extremely well with the Yankees last year when they got him. And what are your thoughts on Tim Hill? Do you think the Mets, that's the type of guy they're looking for? Do they want 2 lefties in the bullpen? Because that seems like that's been a trend. Like they haven't really wanted 2 lefties in a bullpen. And do you think it's possible that Tim Hill could be a Met?
I think it's a possibility. He's drawing a lot of interest. Yankees remain in the mix. Mets are in the mix. There's been mutual interest between Hill and the Yankees, and they're the ones who figured him out. But at the same time, Desi Driscoll now is with the Mets, assistant pitching coach, and he was in that position with the Yankees. He was part of the reclamation of Tim Hill last season, so I think that could also play a factor as well. And the Mets pitching lab and just the resources they have, the development resources they have, coaching, everything, like it's a good fit. Either spot's a good fit for Tim Hill. He's also drawing interest from the Dodgers, the Angels, the Rockies, the Diamondbacks. Like his market's pretty robust. The relief market's starting to move a little bit, so yeah, I think that he would be a very good pickup for the Mets, despite the fact that he's not a hard thrower, despite the fact that he doesn't strike a lot of guys out, and he's another left-hander. Like again, I think that that's an affordable, high leverage deal, and I know that the Mets are looking for another reliever. So I think Hill does make a lot of sense, and the Driscoll connection also should be able to help with Tim Hill. And also he's big market tested. He came up in some high leverage spots, biggest stage last season, postseason 1.08 ERA. Regular season 2.05 ERA with the Yankees in 44 innings. Like this guy, he's battle tested. So I think that's also a bonus as well for pitching in New York.
Has there been any noise with like Ryan Stanek or like a David Robinson, something like that as well? Have they been looking at that as well?
Haven't heard anything on that on either of those fronts from the Mets. Stanek, I feel like, it's been the mystery of the offseason, at least from my perspective, that there's been no noise or anything linking him to a reunion with the Mets. Hard thrower. Struggled when they traded for him from Seattle, having a rough year. He was dealing with a back injury when they acquired him. They tweaked his mechanics. They got him healthy. The training staff's done a tremendous job in the past few years and last year specifically. And they got him healthy, and he was one of their best relievers in the postseason. Like, I think that Stanek would be a good addition and a very good fit as a hard-throwing righty in the back end of the bullpen to pair with Minter and Diaz. But at the same time, like, I don't know, with his health and his age, like that just might not project as well this year across a full season and hopefully a postseason from their the Mets perspective. So yeah, I think that's probably why teams like the Cubs were looking at him. They did just acquire Presley to be their closer, but the Cubs were looking at Stanek, the Braves. Like I just think probably some other destinations might wind up bidding higher for Stanek, and I just don't know that the Mets' interest is that high right now.
Yeah, I definitely could see the Mets being after another lefty, but you do have that internal competition as well between potentially Danny Young and also a Genesis Cabrera that they brought on this offseason as well. So we'll see what route they go there. I know a lot of Mets fans, especially on my channel, love Ryan Stanek and they want to see him back. Again, the greatest mystery of all right now, alongside Jose Iglesias, that they actually bring those guys back. But listen, we're talking about question marks. We're talking about the rotation, relievers. Brandon Nimmo, we alluded to it a little bit ago when you first hopped on. The plantar fasciitis. The Mets were supposedly in on Jurickson Profar before he went to Atlanta. We know that Jesse Winker's also corner outfield option, coming back on a 1-year deal, $8 million. So what do you, I guess, make of this situation with Brandon Nimmo? Let's just say he doesn't and he's not ready by spring training / opening day. What's, I guess, the plan that the Mets could deploy at that point to try to fill that void? And I've kind of thrown the idea out there of having him as sort of a platoon DH, or at least migrating him over towards that sort of role on a semi-regular basis in 2025. Is there any smoke surrounding the Mets organization in terms of the trajectory, given the age and injury status and the long-term contract that he's on for Brandon Nimmo?
With Nimmo, I think it makes more sense that they should be cautious with him early in the season, as I alluded to earlier. And if they're going to be cautious with him and they want to maximize the versatility and positional flexibility on the roster, which I know that they do, then that would likely mean Acuna being on the opening day roster with in a perfect world, having a good spring training and winning an opening day job. Putting Acuna at second, playing McNeil in left, playing Winker in left, playing Marte in left if they don't trade him, which there's not really been traction on that front as of late. So, yeah, I think that even if they decide to start Nimmo on the IL, or if they use him as a DH and some left field like early on, like they could do that. But if that's not the case and he has to start on the IL, like, again, any way you slice it, I think they're hoping Acuna has a good camp and could be on that roster, giving Mendoza and the Mets a lot more possibilities and a lot other ways to get creative and flexibility to allow Nimmo to kind of stay off of that foot as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Acuna is definitely that guy that's first in line for that. So we're about 30 minutes into the stream. We promised we wouldn't keep you long, but I do have one more question for you. We definitely appreciate your time. As always, it means so much. We know that you're a busy guy. What do you say to Mets fans at this point that keep on seeing articles, reports of the Mets having interest here, interest there, but nothing really coming to fruition? What would you say to Mets fans that are kind of pressing the panic button just a little bit on this offseason?
I would just say that they're not done. I mean, I've reported a lot of interest in what they're considering, what they're thinking. Like, I know that can kind of frustrate fans at times, but like part of my job is to kind of find out what they're thinking, the inner workings and what's on the table and report that to you guys so you know what's going on. So when we see these moves happen, sometimes they're surprises. A lot of times they're surprises and they happen quickly, but maybe you won't be surprised if one or two of these moves come to fruition. Like they're all possibilities. There's a million things on the table. There's a million moves to keep up with. And yeah, maybe one or two of them come to fruition. But yeah, again, like I'm doing what I can to keep everybody in the loop. And yeah, that's just kind of how the way things work with these, front offices and, with their off seasons, and they're always going to be opportunistic, and the Mets are no outlier there. And yeah, there's going to be more moves made, whether they're big moves or whether they're more quality depth moves. Like that remains to be seen. And we should find out soon, I would think, with Alonso once he makes his decision.
Hopefully. We appreciate it, Pat.
Absolutely. Yep. Pat, before we let you go, I just wanted to put you on the spot for a second and saying it is spring training. The Mets are ready to go, pitching and catches. They're full workouts, ready to go, and the roster is basically full. Who is playing first base for the New York Mets?
I don't think it's going to be Pete Alonso. I mean, that could change. But like, this is so fluid. Like a week ago, even 2 weeks ago, I was thinking, okay, it's going to be Vientos. Now I'm thinking, all right, maybe it's going to be a right-handed bat that they trade for. I still don't think it's going to be Alonso, but that after what happened over the weekend, like it could, It's never say never, as in Steve Cohen's words the other day. Never say never. It's just unlikely. So I think they would probably prefer to keep Vientos at third. I think Vientos would prefer to stay at third, so he doesn't have to worry about learning a whole new complex position that's super important, and can focus on his hitting and not, avoid that sophomore slump. Like, they need his production. He'll probably be the number 3 hitter, regardless of what they do moving forward. So yeah, I think that's kind of a big thing. Like, I know Vientos he's not a plus defender, but he wasn't a liability. He made a lot of the routine plays. He's a super strong arm for third base. Like, I think that he would probably be better off right now at this stage in his career staying at third base. But yeah, we just don't know. So I think it's either, if it's not Vientos, it'll be a right-handed bat who they acquire. And yeah, that's kind of what I'll stick to for now.
There you go. So definitely, most likely not Pete Alonso. So we'll see how it goes. And the rest of the offseason, I know Pat probably has about 40 articles to write over the next couple of days. But Pat, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for hopping on for about a half hour or so. You answered my questions and Chris's questions. Enjoy the rest of your night, man. And we'll hopefully get you on next time. Thank you, man.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you, man. All right, guys. So there you go. Pat, answered a lot of the questions that, it's hard to, like, with me and Chris, we always try to, look, we don't have sources, right? Pat got sources, right? Other reporters got sources. And, it's just funny that, we were, I'm going to give Chris the credit, got Pat to get on the show today. And it just so happens, when Chris was able to get him on, guess what happened? He wrote like 3-4 articles, and Chris is sending me articles. Oh, like he wrote another one like 20 minutes before he came on. And, it actually, benefited, all the questions that we had prior to most of these articles coming out. So yeah, Chris, I mean, in regards to like this whole thing, right? It seems more and more that Pete Alonso is not going to be playing first base for the New York Mets. Again, he said it's fluid. Cohen said it's flexible still. You never know. But the Mets are moving on. And, I can't blame him at this point anymore, Chris.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. I mean, they've given him a fair shake. And to everybody's knowledge, at this point, they have the best offer on the table right now. And it just seems like his camp, Boris, and maybe even himself, they're not willing to budge at this point. And so the Mets are kind of just left wondering, what else do we have to do? Now, I find it interesting that, again, Andy Martino put something out earlier today or yesterday talking about, he's not going to get the offer that he wants from the Blue Jays, and it's definitely not going to top the Mets offer. And that's kind of a complete 180 to Alonso to the Jays being at the 10-yard line just a week ago. But everything is fluid, and that was really good insight from Pat talking about the Mets moving on, but also just keeping that door open, but also being able to go out and get a guy like Tim Hill or any other relief help without having to worry about what Pete Alonso is going to do, because in the background, they're already targeting their next first option, whether it's Torkelson, whether they just go internal Vientos, or maybe take a swing at Ryan Mountcastle, which I would actually prefer. I actually like Ryan Mountcastle's game a lot. But at this point, the biggest thing and what I took away from that is that Pete Alonso, at least according to Pat, Pete Alonso, there is a scenario where Pete Alonso and Vlad Jr. could coexist on the same team. And I personally, again, did not see that world existing, especially with Vlad moving over back to third base. But at this point, we also have to question how those contract extension talks are going with Vlad and the Blue Jays, which is a very valid point that he also brought up in terms of they're in win now mode by default, given the pressure that's on the Blue Jays front office. Because if they don't perform, they've had so many disastrous seasons where they were supposed to be so much better than what they were. This is make or break time for that front office. And they're not in any, at least in my humble opinion, in any position with what their roster is looking like right now to compete for a championship with some other teams, particularly the National League. Again, the American League, we can objectively say is a little bit weaker, but even in the American League, it's still a little bit of a hard road for them because they don't have a complete roster. So that's kind of what I took away from that in terms of the Pete Alonso situation relating to Vlad Jr. and how they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, and with the Blue Jays, and I see Talking Blue Jays in your stream right now, Chris, and he does good work as well. There's no better time to be a team going for it if you're in the American League. Like it's the Yankees and a bunch of have nots. Like that's basically what it is. And in with extra wild card team, it's easier to make the playoffs, especially in the American League. Maybe Detroit's going to be a little bit better, especially if they find a way to get Bregman. Maybe if they do make a trade for Torkelson, they can get a couple of good prospects, maybe somebody that can come up and help this team as well. We know how good their pitching is. We saw it in the playoffs. But, I have no problem with the Blue Jays. Again, I always, if you're going to go for it, go for it. I don't think any team should half-ass an offseason. I think if you're really going to do it and you're going to spend the money that you're willing to spend, clearly the Blue Jays were trying to spend money. They've lost out on almost every free agent that they try to go after. Last year was Ohtani. He was flying to Toronto, and that was very false and got the Blue Jay fans hyped up and basically give him a big FU. But it's been offseason, Juan Soto as well. Obviously the Mets got him, but that was a battle. They were in it to the end. There were so many other free agents that they've been trying to get. I believe they were in on, multiple pitchers as well, top line starters. And, they finally got Anthony Santander. And you know what? They went that extra mile and overpaid for Anthony Santander. But I never fault a team for overpaying for the guy they want. If you have to get him, get him. Like, don't be afraid of $5, $10, $15 million. And I think that's why I've been so frustrated with the New York Mets. And, that's why it's shocking me that the Mets would be more inclined to spend money on the rotation in a Pivetta, a Flaherty, instead of trading for a Cease or a King, even though it will cost, prospects. But again, Chris, Pat just made me feel more confident that Stearns is not willing to give up prospects. And I've been saying that for a while. I don't believe in it until I see it. And this has been a trend, not just with him, but, just the organization as a whole. They're afraid to pull the trigger because in the back of their mind, they're worried about some guy, one of the prospects being, Bryce Harper or Manny Machado or some Tatis. They're so worried about that, but they're not worried about how that player they're obtaining helped this team to get to the promised land. And I think that's the most frustrating part to me. Now, again, I'm not going to cry if they go and get Jack Flaherty. Like, that's going to make that rotation so much better. And that's the guy I want at this point. If you're not going to go get Cease or King, even though I would rather do that, I'd rather get Cease and King. Yeah, it might cost you, but again, those guys are difference makers. Now, Jack Flaherty can be as well, but Dylan Cease leads your rotation. Michael King can easily be a number 2 for sure. The way he pitched last year, that's a guy. He turned into a really good starter. After he was traded to the Padres, in the Juan Soto trade. In my opinion, I think you go after it. And, the hesitancy of the prospects, Chris, is just, I'm fed up with that because how long are you going to hold on to these guys? Either they're going to lose value. They all can't play on the team. Like, what are you going to bring up the entire farm system and sit half of them on the bench? They're not going to do that. They're wasting away here as you see the Blue Jays, even the Yankees. Right? I'm sorry, the Blue Jays, the Yankees, the Dodgers. Once they build up their farm system, they don't bring up everybody. They use most of them as assets to bring in better players. The pitcher here, a position prospect here, you'll bring up. But the Mets have enough prospects that they brought up. We know the names, right? Nimmo, Alonso, Alvarez, Vientos, all these guys are Acuna, all these guys are coming up. Mauricio, how many more guys do we need? Like, I don't need 9 homegrown talents to come up through the farm system to make myself feel good about this. I want to win. And if it's the better player, and no matter what they are, prospects are prospects. They are question marks until they prove it otherwise. If you're not going to give them the opportunity at the big league level and continue to waste away in the minor leagues, I think it's fool's gold. I think you got to make that trade, and I think you're on board, Chris, that you would probably rather have Cease and King other than Flaherty, in my opinion, if you had to choose, just based on talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely would. I mean, 100%. That's not even a question. I'd rather have Cease more of the three, right? But I definitely take Michael King because him as a full-time starter last season was definitely successful, 100% bar none. And I made a video about him on my channel. I mean, nothing but good things to say about Mr. Michael King. So listen, at the end of the day, the issue here that as it pertains to trading prospects for the rental is just that, especially as it pertains to a pitcher. I am not one of the people who question and are kind of shying away from extending a pitcher that's approaching 30 years old, which Dylan Cease and Michael King are set to be here in this next year. I acquire them via trade, and I would definitely extend them if they prove it, right? If they go ahead and perform in that season. But I think that's kind of the philosophy of what people are making the counter argument of not trading those prospects for is a rental if the Mets don't have any inclination on re-signing them after the 2025 season. But that ball game changes when you're talking about a guy like Ryan Mountcastle from the offensive perspective, because you got him for the next 2 seasons, right? He's 28 years old. You've got him for the next 2 seasons, and he can really be a bridge guy into maybe Vlad Jr. if he hits the open market, right? And you can just use Mountcastle in a different way, maybe a DH option with Winker on a 1-year deal for that last year of control that he has Mountcastle on his contract. I think that the two situations are a little bit different in the viewpoints of whether you make that trade and send the prospects over versus not. But I definitely agree with you. At this point, I've been very adamant, and I won't backtrack that at this point with the Mets core, with them adding Juan Soto, with the National League looking like it is, you have to at least put your best foot forward. You know what I mean? And putting your best foot forward, if you don't want to spend the money on the free agent market and give a guy like Flaherty, let's say 25 mil for 1 or 2 seasons on a short-term contract, assuming that's what it is, Cease is set to make $13 million and Michael King is set to make what? 8, 9? That's as cheap as you're going to get a season's worth of a pitcher nowadays on that type of deal. And so that's the one thing that I also wanted to talk, and I was meaning to ask Pat, but unfortunately time got the best of us, is, we talk about a budget, and reading some of his articles, I see the word budget, and we automatically assume that with the New York Mets, there is no budget under Steve Cohen's ownership, right? We automatically assume that. But a lot of people don't familiarize themselves with the CBT, with the CBA, right? And the penalties that the Mets are set to accrue here on every penny that they add forth to this roster from here on out. I'm not trying to use that as an excuse. All I'm simply saying is that opening up the perspective from the Mets side, are they really reluctant to cross that last threshold at this point? You know what I mean? And I'm still in the boat of saying no. I'm still in the boat of saying no, Rob, because they haven't offered a Pete Alonso, and that would put them way over at that point. So I'm going to say no, but it's starting to creep up in the back of my head.
Even Mountcastle, what is he making? $10 million, $11 million. He's actually maybe not. He's probably making around $7 or $8 million, but that's going to put him over really, really close to that last threshold. See, I don't know. And we talked about that a couple of hot stoves ago, that could be an issue, right? But if that's an issue, again, why were you willing to give Pete Alonso? Are you only willing to go over that threshold for Pete Alonso if he would have took that deal, and everybody else, that's it? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I would love to know that, but again, we're never going to know that. Obviously, time was of the essence with Pat, so we know we have other shows he has to do, and obviously articles to write, so he's busy. So we want to keep him longer. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because it really doesn't make sense on what the Mets are doing financially when, we talk about a guy like Luis Castillo, Chris brought it up to Pat, and, there hasn't really been much about it. And, Pat kind of, I'm not going to say disregarded Luis Castillo, but, he went right to Flaherty and right to Pivetta, in free agency, and kind of realized that, said that Dylan Cease and King are going to cost you. But, you can't have it both ways. You can't, be extremely cheap on the pitching market and also not be able to give up any prospects. Like, you can't have it both ways. That's why Luis Castillo makes the most sense. You can get a guy that's making, 20, 21, $22 million, but he's only making $100 million over the next 3 to 4 years. And that's why Luis Castillo makes the most sense. But it's a very odd situation. And that's why I just don't understand what Stearns is doing here, because it seems like he wants his cake and eat it too. You can't have it both ways. Either you give up prospects to get a Dylan Cease or a Michael King, or you spend the money that is probably going to cost you, Pivetta is probably going to cost you around $15 to $17 million, similar to like a Montaz, around that range, maybe even 20.
Say more than that for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's like, I just don't understand the logic. Like, you can get a better pitcher for less money. Yeah, you got to give up prospects, but you're saving money at the end. And that's why I keep saying, I don't believe, maybe Mountcastle and Torkelson, Pat brought it up if you guys missed it. He talked about Torkelson, what the Tigers will be looking for. He talked about Brett Beatty possibly being in that deal. And, obviously another prospect or two, if they're willing to do that for a first baseman that, had a bad season last year, has talent and has upside. But again, he can end up being, Dominic Smith for all we know. And you're going to give up multiple prospects for that, for more of a question mark. And Torkelson is a question mark. I don't think Mountcastle is going to cost much. Maybe it is a Beatty or maybe, some lower, 15 to 20 prospect in the farm system. But to do it for Torkelson, and like, I'll be okay with Torkelson. Like, again, I'm sick and tired of hearing about prospects. Do what you need to do to make this team better now. Like, stop playing the games here. Either bring up all the kids and play them, or use some of them as assets, because at some point you have to. Like, that's how you get better. I just don't understand the logic of, you might have to give up 2 or 3 prospects. Let's say 2 prospects for Torkelson, probably somewhere in your top 20, right? From like 8 to 20, your top prospects for Torkelson. And, it's looking like more of, maybe they looking for a third baseman, maybe a Beatty and somebody else. I don't understand. Why would you give up prospects that, look, I don't care about them, but give them up for a guy that has question marks, who had a down season last year, was also injured as well, didn't play well. And, there's no, besides control, like, what's there's upsides there, but it seems like there's too much of a question mark. Maybe they will be going after Vlad anyway, and Torkelson could just be a DH or whatever. Maybe that's what they're thinking as well. But what is the logic in bringing in Torkelson, giving up prospects for him, and he's coming in as a question mark, Chris? I just don't understand that aspect.
No, I agree. He definitely would be a question mark, which is the only reason and the only avenue that I would actually be willing to go down the Torkelson route is if it is Brett Beatty involved as the headliner. But something here in the chat that I wanted to at least propose, because we don't want to talk about this kind of situation in this light. We never do, because apparently the Mets farm system all of a sudden is the next best thing since sliced bread, although they got ranked 16th in the MLB overall, and they had
they were just ranked 11th, 10th and 11th last year. Like, at the end of the season,
they had multiple prospects that were in the top 100 and fell off. So what if Henry, who's in your chat, is saying, I think we are overhyping our prospects, and maybe other teams are not believing that the Mets prospects are good enough. And I don't know what happened to Rob. I'm sure he'll be back up here in just a second, but that is a very valid stance, Henry. And I think that there you go. I was just like, you're going to be back up here soon. You'll take care of that. But listen, this is a great perspective, because when we're opening up all these different avenues of thoughts, do Mets fans really, at the end of the day, when they think and try to put their minds in the shoes of David Stearns, do they take a step back and take a look at, is our farm system even good to even convince some of these teams to take on these prospects for a
Yeah,
guy like Michael King? I,
Chris,
I but you have to
may,
think about that though, Rob.
but I think the Mets are doing a bad job hyping their prospects up, because we have a guy across town like Brian Cashman that they haven't had a good farm system in a while. They've been hyping up. How many times? Like, they traded for Soto, they traded for Williams. They make these trades out of nowhere where you go like, how did they get this guy for these prospects? Like,
How did it work out for them? It didn't work out too great.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Well, yeah, sure, but they did get to the World Series with Juan Soto. They did get Devin Williams in here, but they gave up prospects that you're like they got Williams for basically Durbin. That nobody, even Yankee fans, haven't even heard of that prospect until Cashman brought him up, a couple of months ago. That, oh yeah, we're confident in Durbin being our second baseman. He hypes them up and makes them better than what they are. And I don't think Stearns or the Mets in general don't do that very well. They're too
But the difference is, though, between the Mets and the Yankees in terms of the actual farm system is we keep on talking about trying to emulate what the Dodgers are doing. The Mets are halfway there. They're halfway there, literally, by the ranking of the farm system, right? They're halfway there. The Yankees are nowhere even close. So, of course, they're not going to think twice or even three times about sending over a prospect, etc. I hear what you're saying at the end of the day. I do understand it. I get it completely. But let's not also act like, the Yankees, it hasn't worked out in their favor.
No,
Once a prime example of that. We'll see how, Devin Williams ends up for them. They could make the same mistake twice. I just don't think David Stearns is willing to go down that route and that approach. And I don't know, man. It's
but they also don't want to spend money on areas of need. Like, they're getting lesser players. And that's the other thing I don't like about – I'm not going to say I don't like, because it's not fair to completely kill Stearns, even though I am at this point. But, because he did a good job last year, even though a lot of people doubted him. And, people are doubting him this year as well. And, maybe he'll shut us up. But, the issue is, like, all right, maybe the farm system isn't as good. But maybe the players, the prospects in the Mets system that teams like and think they're valuable and think they're going to be good, the Mets also think that, and they don't want to give them up. And that's where you have to figure out that, at some point, again, how many of these guys are going to be able to play? You can bring up Gilbert, Clifford, Acuna, Mauricio, Williams. Where are these guys all playing? You know what I'm saying? That half of them are going to be on the bench. Like, it just doesn't. There's no logic to it at this point. When you got 14 shortstops in your top 10 farm system, basically, and yet you still haven't traded any of them. Yet you try to say, oh, Mauricio is not going to be ready yet. Williams is not really there yet. Oh, you know what? But Acuna, we see big things for him. Well, what are you doing? Brett Beatty's out in the wind. They're talking about Brett Beatty either being at first or third possibility for an internal option. Like, it's like, these guys are not going to all be on the roster. They're all not going to be productive on this roster, because at least two of them, even if they do all internal options, let's say Vientos at first base, Beatty at third, Acuna and Mauricio, where are these guys going? Are they going to be sitting on the bench? Like, it's just too much is there where it can help us in other areas. I'm not saying give up all four of them, but you can't give up two out of the four, even if you didn't really want to. If the Padres say, we want Luisano Acuna for Dylan Cease, right? You would be nuts. And a lot of people ain't going to like this. You'd be nuts not to make that deal if you're the New York Mets. You would be nuts. It might take more. I'm not saying it won't. But if they say, you know what? I don't want Brett Beatty. I don't want two or three other guys that are in your top 15. I want Luisano Acuna to headline that deal, and maybe you can add Brett Beatty into there as well.
So then, according to Pat, literally just 20 minutes ago, when we talked about Brandon Nimmo and the situation that we're going down the route of Brandon Nimmo, and we're seeing him with the plantar fasciitis, what the backup option would be, He mentioned Luis Angel Acuna as the first guy to be that fill-in option, and moving a guy like potentially Jeff McNeil over, then you're just getting rid of that backup option route. So again, maybe they do have a plan for these prospects, or maybe they don't. Again, I think talking about this in absolutes is something that I'm not willing to do, because I'm at least willing to give them until late spring training to figure this out, because there's a lot of question marks. You're right, and I will never ever disagree with that. At this point, there's still a lot of question marks with this team. The rotation needing one more arm, the bullpen needing one more arm there, and presumably what's going to happen at the corners and also left field if Brandon Nimmo is not ready to go. So but on the flip side of it is like, in your scenario, if the Padres are willing to send over Cease and the headliner's Luis Angel Acuna, what are you doing in left field? You know what I mean? You could talk about Gilbert, but like Gilbert's also coming off of a terrible.
I agree, but the organization gave Nimmo a lot of money. You still got Jeff McNeil that you can't get rid of. There's your left field option, like, and there's also your second base. Like, you can deal with it, right? If you have to play Tyrone Taylor in left field to give Nimmo a little bit more shine in the DH spot a little bit, and play McNeil at second base, you do it, because what you're doing is you're making your rotation better. You're not going to worry about the extra offense in the lineup if you got a better pitcher on the mound. That's what I don't understand. Their logic is so off. It doesn't make sense what they're doing, because they're confident in their farm system. They're confident in their internal options, yet they're in on two first basemen they might trade for. There's a possibility of Flaherty or Pavetta, possibly Cease or King, right? If they're looking at these options, then you're not very confident in the internal options. Either you're very confident and you say it outright. Say, these are the guys we're going with. Then do it. I'm okay with that if they're willing to do it. But they're not as confident as they're portraying, because they're going after the guys that we're talking about. Like, you can't have it both ways. Either you're very confident in your internal options, go after it. Because I'm going to tell you right now, Mountcastle is fine, and Torkelson's fine, but if you're going to go internally and you believe Vientos can go to first base, because that's been the talk of the offseason, the Mets are willing to go move Vientos to first base. If they're very confident in an Acuna or a Mauricio or a Beatty, whichever it is, then do it. I don't think they have the balls to do it, to be quite honest.
I don't think Beatty's in that realm. He's not a prospect anymore. He's a failed prospect at this point. He's not in that realm.
But you know what? I don't think the Mets have the balls to actually go completely internal when it comes to the corner positions, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to do that, because
which means that they are willing to trade prospects, though, then, right? Because they have to trade.
I still don't believe it.
Okay, so they're either not, so you said they're not willing to go. You're not confident that they're confident they're going to go completely internal, but you're also not confident that they're going to trade prospects. So what are they going to do?
So, but that's the problem, though. They're not confident, but they're also not willing to give up prospects. I don't believe they are. I think
they're not going to leave the position open, so something has to budge.
They're going to force themselves to do internal options that they're probably not going to be very happy with. They'll tell you that.
Then that's your answer.
But that's the problem. That's why I think they're questioning themselves. I guarantee you, inside Citi Field, in the offices, I think they're questioning themselves, because I think they thought this was going to be a Soto Alonso offseason. They were going to be done with their lineup. A couple of bench pieces, a Winker, Iglesias. I think they thought this was going to be solved already. They were worried about pitching a lot more. And because of this Pete Alonso dragging out, I think they totally went off the grid with what they want to do with the lineup, because they tried for Hernandez, they tried for Peterson, Teoscar Hernandez, Peterson. They were in on Bregman. Apparently, the Mets are finally out, so they were clearly in on Bregman for whatever years and money they thought they were willing to go. So they were in these guys. They were involved in these guys. So they clearly are looking outside. So I don't want to hear about the internal options when you're looking outside, because your confidence level for the internal options isn't as confident as they're portraying to the media.
So my question, and my next live chat question when we do another live stream, is going to be, at what point are you willing to trust in David Stearns and see how this is going to play out before making any rash judgments. This is for the broader Mets fan base collectively, because I remember vividly last year when the Mets were doing what they're doing last offseason, we said off seasons don't win championships, so to speak, right? We said something to that effect. But
Sure.
now we're acting like what the Mets are going to do right now is going to automatically win them a championship. You know what I mean?
No. I know that. But you know what? The Mets also haven't been willing, when they haven't done enough in the offseason, to do it at the deadline. Like, this is the
That's
same.
a separate discussion. That's a separate discussion.
But it connects, because what they don't do this offseason, let's say they do the internal options. Vientos at first base, whoever at third base, Acuna in second, McNeil in left field, whatever it is. Internally, they're going with these guys. And again, I'm not mad at that if they do that. But don't spill me that nonsense that you're looking for 17 other players externally, and then you go with the internal option. You just didn't want to pull the trigger, and that's a fact. But they haven't pulled the trigger at the deadline. Now, first year of Stearns, it was supposed to be evaluation mode, so I wasn't expecting him to trade prospects. But when your team was in it, and he said they were in it, and you could have got a Luis Castillo, you could have got a top line starter to help this rotation that you clearly needed help. They knew they were going to have issues later on.
Last deadline.
Yeah, they were looking at pitching. Right? They got Paul Blackburn.
Luis Castillo. Who knows if he was even available?
In general, they were trying to look for a better pitcher. Right? They went to get Blackburn because they didn't want to give anybody up, which, again, I'm not totally mad at Stearns, because it's his first year. He's evaluating the farm system. I get it. But you know what?
How many games were they back of the actual wild card when that trade deadline happened? We knew that they were half-assing the deadline.
He was the one that kept on saying they're a playoff team, not us. He kept on saying.
They made the playoffs with half-assing the deadline, according to you.
Well, yeah, they did.
So he held up his end of the bargain.
Was it more was it luck or was it talent? Like, could we be clear on that? No, I'm serious. Because the biggest concern was the rotation when we got to the postseason, right? We talked about it every pregame and postgame, right? We always concerned ourselves about the next starting pitcher. Is he going to hold up? Is he going to hold up the innings? We talked about this the late in the season into the postseason, especially the way the regular season extended because of how we had to get into the playoffs. It kind of, there was no rest. And so I just feel like if you're not going to do it in the offseason, which I still don't believe they're going to do, quite honestly. If they go internally, it is what it is. Like, am I going to be upset? I think most of us would be upset. Will I be intrigued because somebody's playing third base? That could be exciting. That could be, what Vientos did last year. And, maybe we see more of the young kids, right? I'm okay with that. But, be on board with that if you're the organization. I still think they're skeptical because – why are you looking elsewhere if you feel really confident in your internal options that they clearly keep on saying, but yet 5 reports came out within 24 hours, in 48 hours since the amazing day. There's articles coming out, Torkelson, Mountcastle, now Flaherty and Pavetta, and you're hearing, it's a weird situation. Again, look, this can be just noise. Right. I'm not saying Ragazzo's wrong or any of the reporters are wrong. Right. They're hearing what they're hearing and they're reporting on it. Right. I don't, they're not putting it out there just to put it out there. In my opinion, I think Andy Martino does, but I don't think I don't think he is because he's been on point, with his reports that, that I've seen. I just feel like they're in between, and that's a bad way to go into the season if your front office is in between, because I don't think they're as confident as they're portraying either way, right? Because it doesn't it seem like they're in on everybody, but they don't get nobody, and then they keep on bringing up the internal options. Like I just don't know. I think they're.
I don't know, Rob. I will continue to say that. I'm going to keep an open mind this offseason. I don't think that – I think what I'm getting from what you're saying is that it's a bad thing to be looking at all possible avenues if you are clearly making up your mind of the internal route. And for me, I'm in the realm of it's not bad even if you don't pull the trigger on a certain move or various certain of moves. It's at least – plausible to look at what could be and evaluating all different possible avenues. And you know what?
I haven't pulled the trigger on anything. I think the Juan Soto thing was an obvious move. I think Sean Manaea, I think he was coming back from the beginning. So I don't think they, I think the Minter move was the only move that I think they actually pulled the trigger on that was worth actually, that had a need. That was really big.
What about Clay Holmes? Are we going to discredit Clay Holmes?
Yeah, okay, I guess, but again, you sign him as a starting pitcher. I still think that's silly. But again, we'll see. The guy can shut me up in a heartbeat and beat, Michael King or Seth Lugo. I just feel like, a lot of ifs and hopes or question marks that, they're trying to go for. They weren't willing to give 3 years to Teoscar. They didn't want to give a little bit of money to Jock Peterson. This Pete Alonso situation, which I agree with, by the way. I think they gave a very fair offer. But, if you want the guy, get the guy. That's what I don't understand. Anthony Santander seemed like it was going to be the Blue Jays for a while, and they figured it out at some point. Now, the Mets and Pete Alonso might figure it out at some point as well. But if you want Pete Alonso, and they said multiple times they wanted Pete Alonso, just go get him. Stop playing the games. Now, look, I don't think they should overextend, but you know what? Give him a little bit of a treat. Just say, all right, we'll give you a few more $1 million more. What is $2 or $3 million more? That's the crazy part to it. Pete Alonso will solve your lineup. You don't have to worry.
I don't think it's $2 to $3 million more, though, Rob. I don't think that's what the holdup is. We both said you've already said that. You don't think it's $2 to $3 million more. We actually know that it's not. We know that there are stipulations in this contract, or at least we should assume, given who the sources are actually saying this, right? But there are certain clauses in this contract that Boris is trying to negotiate. And
yeah, but why is he trying to negotiate that though? They offered a special deal for the Mets because the Mets were steadfast on the $23.5 million, for the 3 years, right? What are they offering 25? You don't think you can take it?
If you're okay, this is not, I'm not even saying AAV at this point. If you are giving a guy multiple opt-outs on a contract, a 3-year deal, you can opt out after the first year, go get your money. Second year, go get your money. And if you're giving him 23 to 25 million because it's somewhere in that range, and they're like, okay, thank you, but we also need to add another clause. And this is where, again, we talk about the structure, and Steve Cohen talked about the structure of the deal, not the actual amount of the deal. So this report or this talking point from Evan Roberts would make sense because we've heard this being floated around, talking about the Cody Bellinger 2.0 clause that makes Pete Alonso extra money if he opts out. What sense does that make? Why would the Mets ever agree to that?
I agree with that. I don't like that. I think that's silly. But again, there's nothing wrong with asking for that. But again, I think Pete Alonso and Boris knew they weren't going to accept that. I feel like from the jump they knew they were going to accept that. But hey, why not offer it? If Cohen's still flexible and if Pete does have an offer from the Blue Jays and he's not willing to take it because of the possibility of the Mets coming back or at least somehow negotiations start back up and, both of them, kind of push towards the middle a little bit, both of them. I that's what I just don't understand. Is he going to wait until the middle of February and say, all right, Blue Jays, you really wanted me, so let's take the deal now. I don't know. He could. Yeah, he could.
I think it's possible. And I think that it does have a hand-in-hand correlation to Vlad's contract, to be honest. I think that those two go hand in hand. And I'm talking about deferments because we also know that Pete Alonso hasn't been willing to take deferments, and that's also what the other issue was. So
well that's the thing with the Mets though. Why defer money? If it seems like they're playing hardball on the deferred money. Why deferred money?
This is where I'm going back to the surcharge and the highest level of penalty in terms of the tax, and then also 60% surcharge or approaching that right thereafter. I mean, Steve Cohen is money bags, but he's not going to pay unnecessary tax penalties up front if he doesn't have to, if he can mitigate that over the course of however many years. I mean, it just makes sense. With the Blue Jays deferred a ton of money
I agree.
on
But
Anthony
wouldn't
Santander's
they
contract.
it seems like the Blue Jays would defer money as well in the Alonso contract. So if he's that pissed off about deferred money, like it seems like any team that's going to be in on Pete Alonso are going to try to defer money. So and that's probably why he hasn't signed with the Blue Jays. I don't think he likes the offer from them either, to be quite honest with you. And there was a report, again, you want to believe it or not, that it's not as great as the Mets offer. So the Mets aren't the only ones trying to get one. I'm not going to say get one over on Pete Alonso, but trying to get the best possible deal, team friendly. Instead
Or
of
just market value for what he's actually worth.
Exactly. And I maybe it's Boris just in Pete Alonso's head banging the drum with that, because I still believe if Pete Alonso had his old agent, he would have been a Met already, to be quite honest with you. Because I think the Mets didn't want to play this game. I truly think that they thought this was going to end up finishing early. They would have had Soto, they would have had Alonso, they had their lineup, and they could have moved on. Because you saw what happened when they quote unquote pivoted. It was Manaea, it was Minter.
That was Manaea was before the pivot.
I'm sorry, Minter. It was Winker.
Winker and Minter.
Yeah, so like they moved on and got guys. I don't know. It is weird how this is all. And I wonder if when Alonso signs, wherever he signs, at this point, I'd rather have him sign somewhere else so we can really get the dirt on what was the real issue overall. Because, there's been hints of it's deferred money. It's, the special opt-out. If he opts out, the Mets have to pay him, which is, silly. But, I mean, if one player had it, I'm not shocked if other players probably asked for it as well. And, it is funny because when you heard of contracts, you heard of years and money. You never used to hear about this deferred money or opt-out clauses, right? Now, everybody can't wait to hear, what's all the details. Does Soto have a private jet, ready for him at any moment, in one of the airports? Like, it's crazy. Like, I remember a long time ago when the Mets were trying to get A-Rod. And A-Rod wanted, his own suite. I think he wanted like a plane or a private airline or a private plane with him and his family to just go wherever he wants to go. And I think that was the holding point for the Mets. I don't know if that's ever true or not, but it seems like more and more we're hearing about the other details of the deal that kind of are not having them come together in any sense, not just Pete Alonso, but a lot of different players and teams, where the deferred money is an issue or can be negotiated, and other things like Juan Soto had all these other stipulations as well. But yeah, I'm sorry, Chris.
Question for you. This is probably the end point of my discussion surrounding Pete Alonso. Do you think, we've said this time and time again, and I'm still going to operate under this, not assumption, but this opinion, quite simply, that if the Blue Jays had a better offer than the Mets, then he would be a Blue Jay by now, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So what sense would it make for the New York Mets to continue to up their offer unnecessarily? Does it make any sense to anybody, just for the sake of signing Pete Alonso?
No, but when a team who wants a player, you get the player. And, I say this with other teams as well. Go get the player. Like, the Mets are just as at fault in this than Pete Alonso. I think Pete Alonso has a little bit more blame, but the Mets are to blame here as well, because they play hardball from the get-go. And if you want player, and you keep claiming to the media on Amazing Day multiple times, you love the player, you want the player, Pete Alonso wants to be a Met. They even said it in that interview. They said it during Amazing Day. Like, go get the guy. Like, I'm sick and tired. Like, they went and got Pete Alonso. Juan Soto, right? Steve Cohen was heavily involved in the Soto thing, but we learned on the Amazing Day, because we were never really sure, Chris, if Steve Cohen was directly involved in these negotiations. And with him saying what he said, he clearly was this whole time. So if you want the guy, go get the guy, regardless of what might be out there. Like, I think if they were willing to give a few $1 million more, maybe defer less of the money, which they clearly can do. Like, if that's the major holdup, I understand the opt-out, but let's say if they go to Pete and say, listen, Scott, we don't like that opt-out clause. We think it's silly. We're not paying you to leave us. But here's what we'll do. We'll give you $2 or $3 extra million a year. You still got the same opt-outs. We'll defer a little bit less money, and you get more money up front instead of deferring the money 5 years, 6 years down the line. Why can't they do that? Like, you're not outbidding yourself. You're not bidding against yourself. You're just coming a little bit more into the middle, and you see if Pete Alonso does it. Now, if they're trying to do that and it's still Boris and Pete Alonso holding their line with their silly stipulation in their contract and not offer and not wanting to move, then I can understand that. Maybe it's at that point, and that's why Steve Cohen said what he said.
It's already at that point. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if they are, again, we don't know, right? We don't know if it just ended with that offered, the Mets offered, and Pete Alonso offered back, and they said, "Screw you guys, that's it," or have they come back to the table and try to get back closer to the middle, and it just hasn't worked out. I mean, we don't know that. And even Pat, when he talked about it, said it, it feels like, it's kind of leading to a divorce here. It feels like that way. And there hasn't been any smoke that anything's coming together, which I'm okay with. But don't tell me you want the guy, you love Pete, and still, and just go get him. Like, it's the same thing with all these other players. Like, how much
Billy Epler did that? He just went out and got his guys, and guess what? Now we have multiple contracts that we don't want anymore. Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil.
But you know what? Nobody complained about that when they signed Jeff McNeil, Starling Marte, Brandon Nimmo. Everybody wanted these guys, and when they got them, nobody was complaining. It's hard to
guess how far we got with those guys.
I agree. 100% agree with you.
Exactly.
100% agree. But at the time, nobody complained about it. Everybody was okay with it. Like, that's these, like, it sucks to look. We both complain about that now, and the Nimmo contract is a disaster. The Marte contract is clearly holding them up. They try to, open up a little bit more flexibility payroll wise by trying to trade Marte, just to get a little bit off the books, and maybe that means that's why they're not going further with Pete Alonso money wise. I don't know. But
Epler set this club back. I'll just tell you all who want, Billy Epler back and that sort of philosophy. He set this club back. I'm sorry to tell you, it's the cold hard truth. Contracts he gave out were atrocious. He knew he had Steve Cohen's money. He wasn't a good executive, and he set this team back.
Steve approved it as well. Like, Steve could have said no, like he's doing now, right? He clearly said he's saying no to the Pete Alonso stipulation with the opt-outs and stuff. He could have easily said no. So, we can blame Billy Epler all we want. But Steve Cohen was in the room as well, saying yes as well. So he is to blame.
Learn from his mistakes, and Mets fans seem to not want to learn from the mistakes either.
He's learning from his mistakes. Now, this can be the best thing ever, right? Pete Alonso goes elsewhere. He makes more money, and it doesn't help Toronto or the Angels win anything. And the Mets go further with a Torkelson or Vientos or a Mountcastle and bring more internal options. Maybe they get another starting pitcher like a Flaherty or a Pavetta, and they do well. And then, you know what? For 2 years in a row, David Stern shuts us up with his philosophy. And again, I said it, and I'm sticking to it. If the pitching lab and all the things that they've been doing with the techniques and all these drills and the mechanics with the pitchers and all these different hitting drills and changing up certain guys to make them better hitters, look at certain pitchers. If it works again, I'm not going to question David Stearns ever again. I don't care who you get anymore. You can get Joe Schmo on the corner to pitch the ninth inning for us if you feel like he can do it. I'm not going to question it anymore.
Are you saying analytics are just if you have a successful season? If you don't, you abandon them? Is that what you're saying?
No, but I think a lot of it, if you're healthy and you don't have a good season, and like say this year they're healthy, but these guys don't play well, and the guys he brought in, don't perform well, right? How fast are people going to blame the lab? Oh, the lab was supposed to fix these guys. All the things that you were trying to do and bring on all these question marks and said they were going to be good ended up not being.
At that point, you have to just say that it was an error of judgment on David Stearns for bringing in the wrong guys. At that point, there's no excuse for David Stearns. So that's what I'm saying.
Do you think he's going to change philosophy? Because he don't seem like the type of guy to change philosophy.
I mean, he's going to have to in order to make something work. If this doesn't work out for him in 2025, he's going to have to at that point. I mean, it's just, and I'm not talking about getting rid of the analytics, lab. I'm talking about going into and changing up the strategy in the offseason. That's what I'm talking about. Listen, I'm not, just to summarize my thoughts here before we get out of here, I'm not discrediting the amount of holes that this team has. I'm just a little bit more patient than it seems like a lot of other Mets fans are in terms of understanding that things take time to play out. And we hear about interest, interest, interest. And again, we talk about different avenues. I mean, you know what? At this point, let's see what it is on field, right? Let's see what it is on field. They're starting spring training. They'll evaluate, they'll put the roster together, and we'll see come opening day. Because again, this can end two ways, right? This can end in the Mets being in a really good spot at the deadline and adding more, and us looking back at David Stearns and like, should have trusted you, or it could end the complete 180 and mimic 2023. And then everyone's going to get on David Stearns. And I'll be one of those people too. If it doesn't work out, then I'm going to get on David Stearns because that means the route that he chose this offseason didn't work. And last year it did work. And everybody was also in the same category. Oh, this is going to be a failed season. You and I were kind of a little bit more optimistic. I don't know if that was false optimism or not, but we were more optimistic, but it ended up working out. So I don't know what it's going to take at this point. I do think everything is fluid, going back to what Pat Ragazzo said. And I think that nothing is off the table for the New York Mets at this point in terms of plan Bs and plan Cs. And what you all should also take away with what Pat said is that they're not done. He doesn't know the type of moves or the magnitude of moves that they're going to make, but they're clearly not done. So take that for what you will.
Well, yeah, they're not done. It's just that they can go tier C or tier A at this point, whatever's left, and consider the tiers. So, but yeah, and you know what? I keep on saying this, and until I'm proven wrong, if it's not looking good, and let's say the Mets are doing okay, but not great, and the needs are whatever it might be, if it's a bat or an arm in the rotation or a bat in the lineup or a bullpen piece, I think the bullpen piece is probably easier to get, but let's say it's the harder things to get are a bat and a rotation piece. I'm not talking about a Paul Blackburn type. I'm talking about the Mets clearly need a top line starter. Do they get it at the deadline? If they're in the mix, and we assume, we hope, let's say they are in the mix, how far is David Stearns willing to go to get that guy? Like if there's multiple teams after this same pitcher, they need to one up all these teams to get that pitcher. I want to say I'm confident in David Stearns doing that. I don't think I am. Again, that's a few months away, clearly. That's, 90, 95 games into the season. But I mean, it just seems like even last year, Chris, before we head out, I even though I felt confident that this team would be pretty decent, not, I wasn't expecting NLCS, but pretty decent. We both had them going into the playoffs. We always worried about this rotation. Our season preview, our biggest concern was the rotation. And it wasn't just because, if this guy has a good season or a bad season, or a mediocre season similar to the year before, we were worried about the innings these guys can actually put up there and perform, right? That was our concern, and we talked about throughout the season into the playoffs. I feel like that's going to come up again. I just feel that way. I hope I'm wrong. I hope these guys, are bulldogs. I think Mania could do it. I think Frankie Montas could throw the innings, but how good can he be? Kodai Senga coming back from injury. Clay Holmes is a reliever. And David Peterson has to replicate the innings he did last year and also be good. There's a lot of question marks.
Well, your question marks, for sure.
I hope the answers are mostly coming and more to come, and they add to this team, and they're actually not tier C or D options, and they're close to like a tier A. I'm not saying get tier A guys, but give me tier B. I feel a little bit better with like a Jack Flaherty over, Nick Pivetta. Like,
I'll take tier A. I'll take tier A.
Yeah. Let's get Dylan Cease and Michael King. How about that?
Right, how about just throw the and in there? Yeah.
Let's go.
Listen, man. If anybody knows this channel, if anybody knows, True Mets Talk, I've said all along, whether it was by myself on videos or with you, Rob, I'm like, Pete Alonso is clearly the best fit. And makes the most sense. I mean, we had Bregman versus Alonso arguments where you said you'd rather go down the Bregman route and I'd rather just go down the Pete Alonso route because I value Pete Alonso's production. But again, overpaying somebody just to overpay somebody at this point is really not the Mets strategy. It's not David Stearns' strategy, and we'll see how it plays out. I'm willing to give it a chance. I'm willing to see the end game in this, and then I can make my final judgment. Like a lot of other Mets fans making their judgment now before seeing how it actually plays out, I mean, you'll have to live with what the end result is there. But I'm willing to let it play out. That's all I'll say. I want to see Pete Alonso back in a Mets uniform. I think it makes the most sense for both sides, like Pat said, but I'm willing to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a choice. We have to let it play out. We can't control anything except root for this team. Unfortunately, that's what we do, even when they break our hearts every single season. But guys, it's been an hour and a half show. Pat Ragazzo was on. Thank you for him for tuning in and, giving us all the answers to our questions. We'll see if, anything comes about when it comes to that. He says they're not done. And I'm going to believe Pat Ragazzo. Again, he didn't give like, okay, these guys are coming or that guys are coming, but he knows they're not done. And I think we all can agree they're not done. Their roster isn't fulfilled yet. There's still more to come. So with that said, guys, thank you for tuning in to a special Mets Hot Stuff Show with Pat Ragazzo joining us as a special guest. Episode 31 is now in the books. Everybody have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your week, guys. Let's go, Mets. Chris, you too. Have a great day, man. And we'll see you next time on the Hot Stuff Show, guys. Good night.
Let's go, Mets.
Dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, dreams bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken backs, but hearts steer clear. OMG, the chaos.